when you watch so many TV shows and movies today, like the villain is always the business guy, right? Like the evil business guy, even in kids shows, right? Yeah. And I think there's this idea that business is bad. Business is about me taking something from you for myself. And that's not even good business principles. I mean, business is about serving others. Yeah. It's about washing feet. It's about adding value to someone else's life.
Yes.
And in turn, then we reap profit from that, right?
Welcome to the Darren Earlywine Podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Darren Earlywine.
Welcome back to the Darren Earlywine Podcast. Thank you so much for downloading this episode. And I think I'm right on this one. It's episode 34. I have been driving Coop, our creative director, and producer Jen crazy because I keep saying the wrong episode number. So I'm sorry, guys. It's right on the pod. It's right on the app. It's just wrong coming out of my mouth. But I think I am right this time. We're sitting down with actually Darren Cooper, our creative director. We're sitting down with his dad and his older brother who have an amazing company and nonprofit that is going to absolutely inspire you like crazy. I can't wait to get to their content. But welcome back to the Darren Earlywine Podcast. Each and every week, we do our best to awaken you to become who you were born to be. And thanks for downloading this episode. If you haven't had a chance, go subscribe to the channel, whether you're watching on YouTube or you download it audio-wise. And we'd love for you to leave a review on Apple iTunes podcast app or wherever you download it. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. Hey guys, listen, we talked about it, and I want you guys to know that we were able this past week, before we recorded this, to record all the new video content for Spiritual DNA 2.0. I talk about Spiritual DNA, the online course and live workshop, often here on the podcast because it's an online course and a live workshop that I've created that that takes you through a handful of assessments that will move you from feeling insignificant or ineffective, not knowing exactly the unique way God's created you, to get you to the place where you begin to know your God-given worth, and it leads you to start changing your world. And so we recorded the content originally about 9 years ago, and we were able to, on this past week, record all the new content. We've added the Enneagram to the course, and we're going to be hustling hard on our part to get those edited, to get that ready to go, and relaunch the website so you can take Spiritual DNA 2.0. If you've not taken Spiritual DNA yet, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to, is maybe just wait about a month, and when Spiritual DNA 2.0 launches, make that the next point, that your kind of waypoint, your launch point. And we're going to work to try to see that happen in the next month or so, and excited for it to come out, excited for you to be able to be encouraged and awakened through it. And so I want to thank those that came, were part of our live studio audience for that event. And we'll have new DNA live events coming up in the future, and just be looking out for that stuff. We're excited to be able to get you guys more and more resources that way. So that's happening. And this week, guys, we're going to sit down with the Coopers, and they run a company called CRF, where basically they own apartment complexes around the state of Indiana. That doesn't sound all that cool. There's lots of companies like that. The unique thing about what they've done and what Dave Cooper has done is that they started this company with the express reason of being a successful company so they could actually funnel and invest profits into missions, global missions around the world. They take so much of what they actually make and give it back to God to do great things around the world. And they have actually invested millions of dollars in global missions in the past 20 years. It is an unbelievably inspiring story, and I can't wait for you to get to it. And here's a couple of things I want you to listen to as you start. One of the main things that Dave and Erik are going to bring out is such a core value for us as a podcast, and it's this. It's that you are called by God to a specific mission. One of the things that they hit on that is such a soapbox issue for me, something I'm so passionate about, is that there is no secular or sacred divide in life. There's not people that have like a real sacred calling, and there's some people that just have a secular job. You just kind of a spectator. Is there's like the all-stars in God's kingdom, and then there's just some role players that don't do much. That's not true. We talk about it all the time, right? Right there in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul starts off and he says, "Therefore, I beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God." And that scripture is not written to a leadership retreat for the church in Ephesus. This is written to everyone, to each one. in the kingdom. And so I want you to hear that. I want you to think about that. I want you to receive that from the Coopers, because if you're at a place right now where you are undervaluing the calling that God has given you because you don't feel like that you were called to serve at a church, or you're not a missionary, you may be missing the amazing eternal impact that God has for you right in the place that you are. Okay. The second part that I want you to listen to as we get in, and we'll have a bunch to unpack at the end of it, but is to begin to, if you haven't, to take seriously the things that you don't want to do. Dave Cooper is going to tell a story about being a ketchup inspector, or it's hilarious. But he had these jobs throughout his life where he realized very early in life the things he did not want to do. And then he gave himself the permission to begin to pursue things that he was passionate about, that he was interested in, and that he felt he had unique gifting to do. And I want you to think about that as you're listening through this podcast. Are you currently protecting and hiding in a ketchup inspecting type job? It'll make sense after you listen to the interview. I want you to think about that. You have a calling, you're living a life worthy to it, and are you protecting a job that you were not called or shouldn't be wasting your life in because God has called you to be so much more than a ketchup inspector? That's what I want you to listen for. And there's going to be so much more good content in this episode. Man, I was inspired when we did the interview, and I listened back to it to prep for today, and was doubly inspired by their life, their story, their faithfulness. And I can't wait for you to enjoy this conversation with Erik and David Cooper right here on the Darren Early Wine Podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Darren Early Wine Podcast. Darren Early Wine, your host, obviously, and always. But we got a real treat today. We've never had two people being interviewed at the same time on the podcast, so we had to make some arrangements here. We had to borrow a mic, but we're going to make it happen.
Widescreen. Yeah,
widescreen. I'm so excited to sit down with a father-son combo, David and Erik Cooper, and Erik's younger brother, Darren Cooper, is our creative director at Blackbird Mission, and we've gotten connected with you guys. You lead a company called CRF. You also have an amazing missions organization called Stone Table, and I'm so excited, guys, to sit down and just hear the story of Dave, of how you created CRF, the mission and mindset behind it, and Erik, the way that you followed God's call in your life and have just been able to help leverage the missional impact of the company. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to start with you, Dave, because your story, it's one that has, from the moment I met your youngest son, Darren, and we started working together here at Blackbird, has just inspired me, because I think some of the ideas and the vision that you chased after to begin CRF are about 20 to 30 years before their time, and what we're seeing happen in industry now. So give us a little intro of who you are, more than just David Cooper, and a little bit about CRF.
Sure. I was born on the East Coast of pastor. I was a pastor's son.
Okay.
Grew up in the church.
We got a bunch of pastors' kids.
Oh, yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
I like
Pastors'
it.
grandkids.
Yes.
Pastors' grandkids, yeah.
And we were in the Assemblies of God, and of course they're very big in missions.
Yeah.
And so we grew up missionaries at the church all the time. They'd stay at our house. We'd get to sleep on the floor while they got our beds, and that's probably why I never went into the ministry. They took my bed away from me. But so we were always involved in missions all the time, and so as time went on, I went away to college, and I never really felt the call to go into the ministry at all. But I really never knew exactly what I wanted to do.
Did you feel like, David, because you grew up in that kind of context, like was that kind of disappointing? Like were you like wishing, like, man, I really want to have a call like those people that I heard growing up? Or did you feel like you were missing something, or was it not on the radar?
No, I don't think so. A lot of times when these missionaries would come in, they'd come in with 3 carousels of slides and put them up on the screen, one after the other, and you'd look at them and, all the poverty and all that. And I never really felt like that was something I was called to do. And I never really felt the call to the ministry, I think, because, as the son of a minister, you see a lot of things that go on, and, and so some point in time when I was about 18, 19 years old, I saw some of that, and I said, I just don't want to do that. And so I went away to college and decided I was going to become a businessman. What that meant, I didn't know. So I majored in management at college, but all the time we were still involved in missions, even at the school. And so when we got out of school, my wife and I moved to Indianapolis, and we started to attend Lakeview Church. And Tom Pano, I was very good friends with his son. Tom Pano was a missions guy.
Yeah.
I mean, no service went by without talking about missions. And every year we had a big convention, and they had missionaries in and all that. And so we've always been tied into missions. And so I was working for an accounting firm, got my CPA, and I think in reality, I never really knew what I wanted to do, but in reality, I was doing work for nursing homes. And I'd go out to these nursing homes, some of these small places, and, I'd see the way these people, the owners, operated the facilities, and I thought, I think I can do that. And so in 1972, I decided not to be a CPA any longer and got into the nursing home business. Not really involved in missions as far as the company went.
Right.
But in 1984, we sold that business. And so kind of stepped forward. I did some other things during that time. But around 1992, we were involved with another developer here in Indianapolis. And he found and came talk to me about a program with Section 8 housing. And so we talked about the possibility of setting up an entity, a not-for-profit entity, because this program that we got involved in was designed for not-for-profit entities. And so that's how we started out into the housing business.
So how would you, Erik, maybe give me a 1-2 sentence definition of what CRF as a company is and what they do.
Yeah, CRF is a nonprofit affordable housing provider. So we own, manage, and construct affordable housing for people who need it. And so when these guys set the business up, it was to leverage that program, but also half the profits every year from day one went back to build the company. The other half was designed to go right out the door to global missions work. And so that was how kind of the whole global missions DNA and business DNA collided there at the foundation of.
So for you, it was the business is kind of what drew you in somewhat, but It sounds like the mission side of things was hardwired into your DNA.
Sure. I mean, when you're 30 years of being around it, it never goes away.
Quick question that's completely unrelated, but I grew up as a pastor's kid, and I remember missionaries coming into our church all the time, and I always joke, for some reason, they always had these button-down shirts that had 4 pockets. Did you guys have the 4-pocket shirt missionaries come in?
I'm sure we did. I never counted the pockets. But,
I don't know what it was. I just remember, and I was like, maybe it was like you graduated from mission school, and they're like, here's your shirt, Maybe you needed extra pockets for food. I don't know. But what's funny to hear you unpack that, Dave, is when growing up as a pastor's kid, I early on knew that I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a drummer. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to make an impact. And I can just remember fearing that if I trusted Jesus with my dreams and hopes, that he was going to ruin my life. Because I saw this missionaries as like they were the all-stars in the kingdom.
Right.
But I thought they were kind of weird and awkward. and I'm not trying to be mean. It just was. And then watching my dad's life, pastoring small local churches, I was like, man, either pastor or missionary seems like what you have to do to be significant in the kingdom. And both of those scared me to death. And I thought it would be, this sounds terrible to say, but I felt like it was going to be a waste of my life. Mm-hmm. But when I sensed a call to ministry, that's been my struggle the whole time. But what is interesting and what I love about your journey is you kind of knew what you didn't want to be a part of, but then it's like God just kind of, like he said, he hardwired that missions, element into your life from the get-go.
Right. And I really do believe that missions is very important, obviously.
Yeah.
And, when missionaries would come in, they were always looking for support.
Yeah.
And rightly so.
Sure,
That's how they got their support. But we felt like when we started CRF, we were really designed more for bricks and sticks. We wanted the church to support the missionary on the field. We wanted to provide them with funds for building buildings, schools. And so that's the direction that CRF went. And so these 30 years now, close to 30 years, that's pretty much where we've designated our funds until recently when we started the Stone Table, we've taken that a different direction. So.
And I want to get into that and unpack that because I love the work you guys are doing. I mean, I remember probably the first time we sat down and had coffee together years ago, I just knew this is a kindred kind of vision and spirit, what you guys are doing with Stone Table. And I want us to unpack that. I do want to just come back some of it, Dave, because there are going to be people watching or listening to the podcast that they listen and they watch because they want to be awakened and become who God's created them to be. They know, we tell them every single week that you're created on purpose and for a purpose. But there's that sense of like, I don't feel like I have what I would call like an Ezra calling to serve within the temple or within the church. Mm-hmm. But I want to do something for God. And I feel like sometimes we buy into this fallacy of that there are sacred jobs and then there's secular jobs. Mm-hmm. You guys both would say that's absolutely not the case. And your life is a testament that like, no, everything is actually spiritual and everything is actually sacred because you've taken a company that, I mean, affordable housing, you're meeting a need. People need somewhere to live, but you've done it to create a life for yourself, but also be able to mobilize millions of dollars into missions. Right. And so was there somebody else that was doing that you were like, I want to do it like they do it? Or do you feel like this is kind of just an idea that God gave you?
Well, I mean, I don't think I can take credit for it. A lot of it came from our connection with a gentleman named Tim Shroud, who's here in Indianapolis. Okay. He was in the housing business. And so a lot of that came from him. When we sat down and talked one day, it was sort of like an aha moment at that point. But yes, I really want to do that. I was in the nursing home business. We look at apartments as being a mission field as well as the money that we give. Yeah. And so when we sat down and talked, I think that was the aha moment when, yes, I can do that. I'm never going to be in the ministry. I'm never going to be in a church as a staff person, but I think that this is where I really need to be. Yeah.
Erik, as Dave's son, you've seen this obviously happen your whole life. This is the story you know as a part of your life. Right. As you've watched it, what stands out to you of watching your dad's leadership and stepping into the call that God had in his life as you guys have built CRF?
Yeah, I tell people we just kind of slow baked in the Great Commission. Yeah. It was just part of who we were and what we did. And so that's why I don't even think he would have told you like this was some grand strategy. It was just kind of the opportunity that presented itself. And like I can use my gifts in business and I can make an impact for missions. And so it just kind of happened, right? Like I don't even think we would have articulated it that clearly. And so for me, it's been fun to kind of come along later and kind of reverse engineer the whole thing with Tim and with him and to kind of talk through the whole process and genesis of the company has been a real joy for me to kind of tell the story, because now you kind of mentioned it. I tell them they were business as mission before it was cool and hip, right? Yeah. And now it seems like everyone is seeing this connection point. And, I think we've done a real disservice to a lot of young Christian people by creating that bifurcation between the sacred and secular. Yes. I don't think we intended to do it. No one came along and said, let's insert a bunch of bad theology here. Right. But because there is something unique about what my grandfather did, about what your father did, right? Yeah. There's something unique about the ecclesiastical call to full-time ministry. So I think in trying to elevate that, what we did was intentionally push down marketplace Christians. Yeah. And so I think it's not about reducing the importance of the ecclesiastical call. It's about elevating the marketplace believers to understand that who they are and how God made them is part of His kingdom work.
Absolutely, Aaron. Absolutely. Well, I always tell people, it's like in God's kingdom, everybody gets to play.
Right.
Like this isn't a spectator-driven sport, and I think that it was bad theology. It was intended to elevate the call of God into ministry, but I think what happens, we said, hey, there's about 20% of you maybe that get a play. The 80% of you, you're spectators. We'd like you to finance what goes on in God's kingdom, but you don't play an integral role, right? And then we're shocked why 80% of people, like the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 principle, of 20% of the people do 80% of the work and give 80% of the money. But I think some of it is because we taught them you don't have a place on the team, and you may not have been a grand scheme, but what I love that you guys Dave, that have done through CRF is that you have your business and your life are giving people a tangible ability to reshape imagination. And I come back to this so often on the podcast, is I think most people don't necessarily suffer from an obedience issue into stepping into God's call. They have an imagination issue. They have a deficit of imagination of what it could look like. And what I love is that I think God has shown favor to what you guys have built, because you guys can serve as an example to reshape and open people's imagination to what's possible. And I want to get a couple funny stories from you, David, because some of that shaping of imagination, right, is shaped by you identifying what you don't want to do, right? And somebody's watching the podcast, maybe they just graduated from college, maybe they're in their 20s, they're trying to figure out calling. It's like, I want to do something great like David Cooper. I want to build a great company. But right now, they're just trying to figure it out. So, but some of your process was you figuring out, like, check that off. I don't want to do that. Talk about your burgeoning, career in the ketchup industry.
Well, when I was in freshman in college, came home that summer, and I got a job in a local factory that made ketchup and tomato juice.
Okay.
And all the farmers would bring their trucks in, and they'd unload them, and they'd go through the process. And my first job was ketchup is cooked in these large ovens, or whatever you want to call them, and then they would pump that ketchup through pipes over to the bottling area.
Okay.
But the ketchup would go through a homogenizer, very much like what they do with milk.
Okay.
All the ketchup would go through a homogenizer, and they had hooked up a copper tube coming out of the homogenizer, and it twisted around down into a big bucket, and then the tube came out and into another bucket. And so the ketchup would go through this homogenizer, and some of it would be pushed through this copper tubing, and it would cool. They had ice in it, and they would cool, so it would come out the other end. And my job for 12 hours a day was to sit there and watch the ketchup come out of the end of the tube, and if it came out too far, I had to go tell them that they needed to put less water into the ketchup.
Yeah.
And if it didn't come out hard enough, it would just barely come out.
So you were a ketchup squirter inspector.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
That sounds riveting for 12 hours a day.
Oh, it was. And of course, there were a lot of things that went on in a ketchup factory that, like tomato fights and things like that. But when you worked the noon or the midnight to noon the next day shift, the supervisors were gone, so there were a lot of things that took place. They also made pickles. I could tell you a few pickle stories too.
Well, how many months into that job, or weeks, or little hours, Dave, were you like, I don't think I want to spend my life inspecting ketchup?
I believe it was the first 6 hours I worked there.
And how long did you work there?
I worked there 2 summers, and then I'd had enough of that, so I went to work at a glass plant. We made glass bottles.
But you've done a lot of things. We don't have time for the story. Well, next time you come out, I want to talk about the story where you worked overnight at a Motel 6. Is this correct?
It was a local motel.
Local motel.
Empire Inn.
And you hung out for months with a convicted escaped murderer. That was a fine gentleman after you got done on the road crew.
He was very nice.
You didn't know he was a murderer at the time. Yes.
Yeah. Except for killing people. Great chap. But here's what I want to bring out from this, Dave, is what I love about your story, and what I want people to hear today is there's somebody right now that they're struggling to trust God with their future. and they're holding on to a Ketchup type job, right? I got this job. It's 12 hours. You said it paid you pretty decent, right?
Yeah, like 50 cents an hour.
Okay, that's big money back then, right? But I mean, you were making money. You had a job, and you could have held on to that and said, you know what? I don't know about ministry. I don't know about missions. I don't know about trusting God. I'm just going to stay here. It's predictable, and I'm going to watch Ketchup for the rest of my life. And had you trusted that, or had you not trusted where God was going to lead you and saying yes along the way, we're talking about a business doesn't start that has literally, manifest and funneled millions of dollars into the kingdom of God. And I just love that's where God will take us if we'll just, one of my mentors, Jim Peters, would just say, if we just default to yes.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful journey. Erik, let's talk about bring you up to, or bring everybody up to speed on your journey. Yours is interesting too, because you've done a little bit of everything. You've been worship pastor, you've been a church planner, you've been, you've done a lot. Now you're overseeing Stone Table, which is the missions, part of the nonprofit. But fill us up a little bit into the Erik Cooper story.
Yeah, I mean, the quick version of it, I usually tell people I'm the most confused guy in the room, and yet they give me a microphone and let me talk, so I don't know why. But yeah, I started out as a music major in school.
Okay.
And then graduated with a degree in accounting. About halfway through my music degree, I thought, I'm going to starve to death.
Yes.
And so
unless I'm Liberace, I'm probably going to need to find something to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, my stint in the music industry in Nashville, Tennessee was I worked in the mailroom at Word Records for,
you got to start somewhere.
For about 3 or 4 months. Yeah. So started out music, graduated with an accounting degree of all things. Worked for a CPA firm because that's what my dad did. I thought that's what you just had to do. Worked for a CPA firm for 2 busy seasons. It was the worst job I've ever had in my life. And I could tell you some crazy, I don't have any good Ketchup stories, but I got some good CPA stories.
I tell people, murderers at all?
No murderers, but I tell people I'm a recovering accountant. So I've been clean now for, I think, a good 20 years. But yeah, so I worked as a CPA in a CPA firm, and then worked in private accounting for a while. Then went to work as a music pastor. So back now from accounting backwards into music. Did that for almost a decade, and then planted a church, was a church planter for about 4 years. And then 8 years ago now, stepped back into CRF and what became now the Stone Table, to work both on this business and missions ministry marriage, kind of this marriage between the marketplace and the mission of God in the world.
So when you're going back and forth there, Erik, was there a sense when you went back to do, or went in to do music ministry and that bounce between CP, I mean, like, secular work, sacred work, whatever. Was there a sense where you were trying to kind of figure out a sense of calling, or take us through that journey?
Yeah, probably would not have said it that way, but yeah, I mean, I remember, going from accounting into full-time ministry. It was like, oh, I've finally given my life over to ministry, to this calling that I've had, and I always tell people that whole story for me goes back to summer church camp, right? When the last night of church camp was called into ministry night.
Oh yeah.
And, about 10% of the kids would raise their hands, say, yes, I've been called. And I was always one of the 90% that never felt that call. And I would tell them, I'm just going into the secular marketplace. I'm just going into secular work. So I think when I finally did end up on staff at a church, it was like, oh, maybe this calling comes later or whatever. But I would have never seen, I still had that kind of dichotomy, or that bifurcation, or that partitioning of my life where, the accounting work was secular and the ministry work was sacred.
I'm sorry, I'm getting passionate. Maybe it's the coffee. Good. Here's what kills me.
Important.
Here's what kills me is, in my story, I always talk about, I had the same thing. Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday night. In my brain, it was Wednesday night, church camp, right? I'm back on the left side of the campground, auditorium, called a ministry night. And I sense the Holy Spirit say, it's you. So I get to come down, and everybody's there crying. Everybody's like, oh, Lord, this next generation of pastors, right? I feel super special. It's great. That moment changes the trajectory of my whole life. But I always think to myself, it was probably maybe 10% of us down there. And I think about, what about the other 90% of the kids that were sitting there going, man, it sure would be cool if God had some kind of plan for my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the secular marketplace was almost like for the people who had no discernible calling. It was like, hey, can you just go out and harvest some of those evil secular dollars and drag them back into the kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a really unfortunate and unintentional. I think it was unintentional. This concept of this theology of faith and work and how the marketplace really is part of God's redemptive plan for the world is not something I heard.
Yeah, agreed.
Growing up,
agreed. Yeah.
And I don't think it's because someone was trying to hold out on me, and I don't think it's because we need to decrease the honoring of the pastoral or missionary calling. Right? It's just helping everyday believers, everyday marketplace believers understand that their work, not just the money now we want them to give. Okay, the generosity is a huge part of the kingdom, but it's actually the work you do. Whether we tell people whether you're a brain surgeon or you sweep floors at the local fast food restaurant, like redeemed to Christ, that the gospel redeems and resurrects all things.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have for you. So you go into the ministry, you do the music ministry, you plant a church. So now let's reverse the tables. As you stepped out of full-time church work to go partner up with your dad with Sierra, was there a sense of mourning or a sense of confusion, like, oh, now am I turning my back on God?
Yeah, I do think, I remember when I first went into the ministry, I never wanted anybody to call me pastor. I thought it was weird, right? And then when I stepped back out of ministry, I was like, oh, I'm not a pastor anymore, right? So there was this kind of weird mourning process there. But I think in fairness, at that point, we were already articulating the CRF story within a missional context. And so one of the reasons they asked me to come back into this role was to kind of marry, to kind of straddle both sides of the coin. So I think in fairness, I still felt like I was engaging that calling very much by stepping back into the marketplace. And so, no, I didn't wrestle with it as much. I was excited about it because I felt like the Lord was illuminating something inside of me that when I shared it with other marketplace believers, I'll never forget. First time I occasionally get invited to speak at various places because I don't have a Sunday gig anymore, right? And the first time I ever spoke on faith and work, it was a little Nazarene church down in southern Indiana. I didn't even know what I was talking about. I mean, I grabbed some Tim Keller stuff and kind of put this sermon together, and people were down at the front weeping after the service was over. And at first I thought, what heresy did I swerve into? What have I done? And what I found was that people, one guy said to me, I've worked in a factory for 30 years and I never felt like who I was and what I went to go do every day when the alarm clock went off mattered to God.
Wow.
And so for me, I realized very quickly this divine connection between the marketplace and God's work in the world.
Erik, do you think if you hadn't had the kind of, most confused person in the room, right?
Fair.
If you wouldn't have had that journey, I don't think you have the ability to have the compassion and empathy and vision that you have now what you're leading.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I think back to some of my days in accounting, and I love to Christmas Eve one year, I was doing an inventory count up in a warehouse in northern Indiana, right? Counting widgets, three stories up on a scissor lift, literally taking a widget out of one box, putting it in another and checking this off for this inventory count we were doing. And I think about that a lot because I do understand what it is to go to work every day and think, how in the world does this matter to anything God is doing? And so to have that renewed and revived and then to be able to share that with other people, it's an important thing to me. So.
David, one question I want to ask you, and one thing that your younger son, Darren, that works with us here at Blackbird Mission, unfortunately, you guys spelled his name completely wrong, but that's for another podcast. But one thing he says is when we'll talk about what you've built, what Darren will say is, I don't know if my dad had a grandiose vision from day one. He said, what I observed is he got up every day and he went to work and he built a great company. And I want you to speak to that because I feel like sometimes maybe this next generation, I don't know, maybe they miss the idea of like, man, I want to do something significant. And maybe they're going to listen to podcasts. I want to build a company like Dave, which I bet they do, and I remember John Maxwell one time talking about where he was speaking somewhere and, room full of people, and they'd paid, hundreds and hundreds of dollars to come to his conference. And some young leader came up to him and was like, Mr. Maxwell, like I've been doing the math here. And he's like, you're bringing him a pretty good payday today, and I'm noticing this. And he's like, I'd really like to do what you do. Mm-hmm. John Maxwell looked at him and said, I bet you do, son. He's like, if you want to do what I do, you have to do what I did.
Right.
And there's a part of that is people can look at, oh man, I want to build a company that gives away millions of dollars to missions. Well, I bet you do, but there were a lot of days and weeks and months and years where you just woke up and you went to work and did good business. Talk about the faithfulness, perseverance side of that.
That's a hard one. I guess the best way I can express that is that I never really had these grandiose ideas of making millions of dollars. I had a family. My objective was to support my family.
Yeah.
And but as I got involved in things and saw other people, what they were doing, then I felt like I could do that. Once I felt like I could do that, then my mindset changed, and that's how I stepped out and started to do other things. And I've been involved in a lot of different businesses, nursing home business. We've built condos. We've done a number of other things. But it's never been, for me, the financial side of it. It's been, I enjoy the work. I enjoy what I do. And I think a younger person, it's very tough for young people because when they come out of school, they most times don't know what they want to do. And so they end up getting a job in an office somewhere. And then as time goes on, they start making a little bit of money and they buy a car, and then they buy a house and they, get themselves into debt. And then it's tough for them to make that decision to move forward. But if you really believe in what it is that you're doing and take an idea, if you really believe in it, it may take you a long time to get to that point, but you really have to live and breathe it. And that's when we got into the housing business, I had really felt like that was where I needed to be. And so it was very easy for me to get up every day. And I'm a little older now and I keep getting up every day.
I can't get him to retire.
But it's, what else are you going to do unless you have something in mind? And so I think a young person today really just has to look at what do you enjoy doing, and then how can I do that to the best of my ability, and also with the Lord's guidance, how can I get involved and move forward? And I think that's, to me, that is the most important thing today.
Darren, I would just add from my seat on the bus.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably would have never even heard the CRF story. Neither he or Tim probably would have ever told the CRF story if a blabbermouth like me hadn't come along, kind of the second gen. Mm-hmm. And what I saw from the outside looking in was just a guy who got up and went to work every day. He just got up and faithfully went to work every day, wasn't looking for glory or glamour. At the end of every year, whatever the cash flow number was, half of it went to missions, right? And they weren't looking for anything other than to be faithful to what was in front of them. And I think I see this even in my generation, Gen X, but especially in the younger generations. They want to live in these glamorous glory stories. And I'm just telling you, the kingdom is in the minutia of the everyday faithfulness. And I always ask people, what if you did exactly what God called you to do, and no one ever knew it? What if it was anonymous? What if God called you to complete anonymity? And, of course, it's easy for me to say here, being interviewed about what we do, right? But I'm saying, how many faithful, anonymous people are out there that have made eternal difference in the kingdom? And you won't know their stories until we all stand with Jesus one day and hear him say, well done, right?
Wow. Yeah, we gotta let that sit for a minute, because people just need to soak in the enormity of what you just said, because it is so true. And I think this next generation, I mean, even my generation, then my kids, like, it's almost like everything has been reversed. Like, hey, now, build your name and your brand, your notoriety on social media platforms for really, really doing nothing. Right? Like, you know, you haven't really built or done or accomplished anything, but if you can get people to like your pictures or whatever, you've really built something. But and the crazy part is, I mean, it's like I remember a couple of years ago or last year, whenever it was, when you know, TikTok was a thing that was big, and then it almost disappeared. And I know some people who actually, there were some Christian TikTokers who, there was a point there where some Christian TikTok accounts were just being like erased. TikTok was getting rid of them. And, you know, people who have built this brand, or they've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers or whatever, you know, and then in a moment it's gone. You know, in your guys' generation, it's like, well, you know, maybe you could make the paper or something, right? But it's like, right. You weren't doing anything for clicks or likes or comments or you just got up and you went to work every day, and it was your hard work and your perseverance, you know, that has set you apart. Because I'm guessing, like now, like you're saying, you're telling the story. You've got 30 years behind this. It's successful. God's opening up brand new, huge opportunities for you guys, you know, beyond your wildest dreams. But I'm guessing we do this podcast in year 7. It's like we're providing housing, and I go to work, and I've got some kids I'm trying to raise, and it's Monday. You know, but you're faithful and you show up and you do it, and you trusted God with the results, and it was informed by His mission.
Darren, I think part of it is we got to invert the story, and what I mean by that is, you know, the old story of Copernicus, right? They used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around it. I think, and I'll raise my hand and say I'm guilty of this too. I think a lot of Christian marketplace people want to say, I want to build my career, I want to build my business, I want to build my brand, and I want to bring my faith along on that journey, right? But it's got them at the center, right? And it's got God at the periphery. And God wants to invert that. And He wants you to say, look, I am a beloved member of the supporting cast in this grand story that God has been telling, and I get to be a part of that journey. And maybe I'll get some FaceTime, maybe I won't, but my call is to faithful obedience. Yeah. And then we let God work out the rest, you know, from there. So
it's beautiful. Dave, you guys are at a point right now, and where God's opening up some doors where you have potential to, you know, double, triple the impact that you have made in 30 years. For sure, that's beyond your wildest dreams. But do you feel like, you know, there's that biblical principle, right? I mean, the Old Testament, right? From the get-go of, hey, you're going to be blessed to be a blessing. And God's looking for people that He can say, okay, who can I trust with increase that I know will be faithful conduits? You guys have proven that generation after generation after generation. What does it feel like for you to know, for what you're seeing God do right now, that it seems like God's saying, like, Dave, well done, and I'm going to entrust you, you know, I'm going to entrust you with an increase because I know that you'll use it well. What's that like to be at this point in your career and know that God's showing great favor?
Well, I think it feels great.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that I feel so comfortable about it is that the people that we have involved that are going to take it the next step. I realize I've gotten to this point where the next step is out of my league. And so we have the people in the company that are capable of taking it to that next step. And to me, I'm thankful for that, because when I do finally step away, if my golf game gets better, it's going to be shortly. But, you know, knowing that I have my son and other people, my sons, who are going to take this to the next step. And, you know, it's never been about money for us. We obviously were set up as a not-for-profit. Like Erik always says, you know, it's not going to go into his bank account. It's not going into my bank account, and that's good enough for me. It really is. So.
It's such a beautiful thing, Erik. You're part of taking it to the next level. What would you say? Maybe there's an entrepreneur watching the podcast that they're dreaming of that kind of life, or maybe they're there right now and they're going. Maybe they're in a similar kind of industry, but they've been sensing God saying, "Hey, like, if if you'll expand the vision of what this could be, like not just like you're talking about, it's not just, you're not the center of the universe here, but we could partner up together and we could really start moving some mountains. What would your encouragement be to somebody that might be in that place right now?
That's a great question. I mean, I think obedience is always the call in the kingdom. Obedience is always the call. So I would say, listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying to you. I've been reading through the Pentateuch and just finished Joshua today, and the taking of the Promised Land. And I think one of the things that's very interesting is how many times God says to the Israelites, "Hey, look, you have conquered the Promised Land, but I'm the one that won the battle." Yeah. Right. Yeah. So your job is to listen to me, to surrender to me, to depend on me, to not follow after idols and other pursuits. Right. Yeah. But God was very clear that, whatever success you've had, ultimately it's because I gave it to you. It doesn't mean you didn't play a role in it.
Right.
I would say that about CRF, right? Like, I mean, the faithful getting up and going to work every day obviously played a role in us getting where we are right now. But it's God's victory. He's the hero of the story. And so I would just say to any entrepreneurs that are out there, just be obedient. Just listen and be obedient. You don't have to do what we've done and give half your profits away, but whatever the Lord's speaking to you, don't be afraid of it.
Yeah. I love it. I think about, look at, the tenor of our culture right now. And this, obviously the younger generation, obviously it seems like there's a strong villainization of the wealthy, right? You got to pay your fair share and you got to do this and we're going to tax this. And it's like that if you make a lot of money or you manufacture the ability to build wealth, somehow you become a greedy, terrible person. Yeah. And I think what I notice is I feel like there's an element where there is a prophetic voice coming from that of like, hey, just consuming everything for yourself, like uncontrolled greed, bad. Right. That part is a good critique. Yep. I think the difficult part is for that younger generation to realize like yes, when it's all for you, it's a gift that consumes itself. But if they can take their desire for, to give in the idea of generosity, but then infuse it with hard work and what it takes to build something, maybe the next generation can grab onto this idea of like, hey, it's okay. You want a company to make $600 million a year? No problem. But if you can put a check and balance that we don't just exist for our own pocketbook, but we exist to actually make the world a better place.
Isn't there, I mean, when you watch so many TV shows and movies today, like the villain is always the business guy, right? Like the evil business guy, even in kids shows, right? Yeah. And I think there's this idea that business is bad. Business is about me taking something from you for myself. And that's not even good business principles. I mean, business is about serving others. Yeah. It's about washing feet. It's about adding value to someone else's life. Yes. And in turn, then we reap profit from that, right?
Right.
And so, greed, I tell people all the time, if you look at greed, I mean, Paul even references greed is not a money issue. Greed is an idolatry. It's a worship issue. Yeah. It's a wrong worship issue. Yeah. If we worship the wrong thing, you could have $10 and be greedy. Yeah. Or $10 million and be generous, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a positioning of the heart. Yeah. And that's what I think we've got to call people to.
I love it. Guys, we got to do this again sometime because I want to get in. What I want to do, I'd love to have you come back and I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into this to the Stone Table whole process and what you guys are creating, because you have made a shift, from sticks and bricks, like you've talked about in mission giving, to a whole different vision. That I want to have you back, and we'll make sure that producer Jen gets us locked back in to have you back, because you guys have laid a foundation today of the story that is going to impact so many people. But what I want to do is have you back and talk a little more about Stone Table, because I think there could be some more prescriptive type steps that could be very empowering for people to come back and have you back on the podcast. But Dave, thank you so much for your faithfulness, your courage. Thank you for not still watching ketchup come out of a copper tube. Erik, thanks for your journey and the passion you're bringing in, the passion that you're bringing for the kingdom and what you guys are doing with CRF and Stone Table. And can't thank you guys enough. If they want information on what's going on with CRF or Stone Table, how can they stay connected with you guys?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can always find out about our housing company at crf.net. But then at the Stone Table, we got a whole resource page. We've even got a free 5-day devotional you can download And we don't sell anything. We're not going to, come after you or any of that, but you can download it at thestonetable.org, thestonetable.org, and then / our resource page. But the whole story's there, and hopefully a whole lot of videos and articles and things that maybe will encourage people.
It's awesome. David, if you could do it all again and name your son, your youngest son, Darren, but change the spelling of the name, how would you spell it this time around?
Well, obviously you're looking for Daron.
I'm saying it's a very strong choice. A man of wisdom.
Can I tell you where Darren came from?
You can.
It's part of David,
okay,
and part of Karen. Darren. That's where it came from.
So you manipulated the proper spelling to make it work for your family. So you're saying it's probably wrong.
It's true.
But you're going to go with it.
We were very manipulative. Yes. So
you've heard it here first on the Darren the White podcast. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Absolutely. And we're back. I told you. I do not lie to you on the podcast. Love the Coopers. Such good content. Like I told you before we went there, right? This idea that I just couldn't get away from the story of Dave watching ketchup squirt out of a copper, tube. And I'm not saying there may be somebody today that is still watching ketchup, and I don't want to demean that idea. And there's always jobs that need to be done. But if Dave had stayed in that job and the only imagination or thought of his life is, well, I guess this is paying the bills, so I should just stay here, that somehow like that job, defined him, or that he needed to try to protect that because it provided for him. It breaks my heart, but it fills me with such like passion to think about like everything that wouldn't have happened on earth. Now, actually, I think probably the idea that CRF has and they're doing with Stone Table, it is from God. So I think he would have given it to someone else. But Dave Cooper and their whole family would have missed out on the journey, the excitement, the growing of faith, everything that has come in because that he has moved towards rejecting an idea of fear or security and stepped out in faith and faithfulness. And I just wonder right now, if you're listening to the podcast, and I don't know if you're right out of college, maybe you're 35 and you just feel kind of stuck in your job, or you're even later on in your age, your career, you're 45 and you're thinking, I have hated what I've done since day one, but I've stayed here because I'm trying to protect, and here's a phrase I want you to wrap your mind around, the illusion of safety or security. The illusion of safety of security. And this just came together this week as I was listening to this. I was listening to a podcast by Erwin McManus and his son Aaron called Battle Ready. Check it out. It's a great podcast. And they were just talking about the conditions of our culture right now and how much fear is creating the inability for people to really step into risk, really step into calling, because they've I don't think we can overestimate the long tail effects this year is going to have on us as far as just fear. People are afraid of people. People are afraid to get sick. People are afraid what people are going to think about them if they're not afraid of being sick. Like, it's constant, and I think it's going to take a while for us to be like, wow, I didn't realize how deep-seated fear had gotten in just 12 months. I think there are going to be some people that are never going to recover from the place that fear has taken them this year because they don't know that they should fight it. They don't know that they should fight it. They're making friend their fear because they're buying into this illusion of safety. It's what Erwin said, this idea of illusion of safety was the sentence he used, and it stuck out with me because here's the deal. I think for many of you who have lived a courageous and wise life, and you've stepped into this year and you've taken caution, you've been wise, but you didn't come into the situation with COVID and everything that's gone on the past year. You didn't step into this year with the illusion that life was safe and secure and guaranteed. You knew and you lived every day like, I have one life and I could die from anything. My life is not guaranteed, and I'm okay with that because I know that God is eternally protecting my life. I know that even if I die, it's an upgrade, that you've walked through life and you've embraced wisdom and courage. So you dealt with what's gone on this year, but it's not paralyzed you. It's not put you in a place where like, I can't move forward. I think, though, there are some other folks that you have been maybe living, or folks are living with an illusion of safety. that they could control their life, that they could control and create a safe environment where there would be no risk, no fear, no failure. And now that what's happened with COVID, it's come on and it's shaken that. It's begun to mess with the foundations, how they think life works. And so now they have that on top of everything that's happened, and they're stuck at a place right now where they may not be able to move forward in faith. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. Is I don't know that you need that God is calling you to start a company like CRF. I don't know if God's calling you to quit your job. I don't know if God's calling you to go ask that girl to marry you. I don't know what the risk that God has invited you into. But here's what I've learned from reading the Bible and living my life is that, and Levon Reap in one of our last episodes just said this, that right, faith, that risk is a great 4-letter word for faith. That walking this journey to become a you were born to be, and owning the fact that I am made on purpose and for purpose. I have a sacred calling because I'm connected to a sacred God. The relationship I have with God, it sanctifies and it brings a sacred nature and a sacred mission into everything that I do. Every relationship, every responsibility, I do it as though I'm working for God. Embracing that understanding, it actually can now lead us to step out of fear and into the understanding of what God's called us. So he's going to call you into risk. And here's what I think is going to happen. In the next year or so, it is going to be the courageous that create the future. Let me say it again. It's going to be the courageous that create the future. There are companies, there are opportunities, there are promotions, there are things that God is going to place out in front of you and built on what we know, what we talk about in spiritual DNA, that you are the actual workmanship of God, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he's prepared in advance for you to do, is I believe there's an opportunity that our culture is creating, that those that understand that God has a sacred calling on their life, that they are actually secure in the covenant of God and can step into the kingdom authority and power that God has given him, is that he has what he has in advance for you to do is to be influential and faithful to create the future for whatever industry or life or city or school or whatever it is where he's placed you. I think this is an opportunity for people connected to God to take a step forward, not a step back. Because we've not lived with an illusion of safety. But we can embrace faithfulness and faith. And that's what I hear from this story with Dave Cooper. He woke up every day and he was faithful to what he did. Was it every day great? Was every day wonderful? No, a lot of it was weeks and just building a company and doing good business and taking care of people and undergirding the whole thing with a sacred purpose. He was faithful in it, and he kept moving forward in faith, kept taking risks. So if you're at a place right now where you're listening and you were just like your heart was pounding because you know what? I am still in that Ketchup inspecting job. And I've been buying into this illusion of responsibility and safety. Like I can't take this risk that I feel like God's calling me because I've just got to, I'm being ungrateful that I want to move out and I feel like God's nudging me. You might be being ungrateful, but the nudge of God to take a risk and move forward with him doesn't necessarily mean that you're ungrateful. You may be at a job where he's giving you a level of discontent from where you are because he's got something greater for you. To wrap up what you do every day in the sacred environment of somebody that is called, that is created, that is invited into what God is doing in the course of human history, that will wake up every day and say, you know what, I'm going to be faithful today. I'm going to show up Monday through Friday. I'm going to do my best because I know I'm working for the Lord, and I will not allow fear to keep me stuck because the future will be created by the courageous. Gosh, I can just keep saying the same thing over and over again because it's got me so stoked. This might be a double listen episode to go back and pick up some of the more of the things that Dave and Erik said. We're going to try to have them back on in the near future to unpack some more of the stuff that CRF is doing because that could be very, I think, prescriptive and very helpful to you. And gosh, so good, so good. Move forward. Give up the illusion of safety and embrace the risk and the excitement of faith. And listen, if you haven't taken your step, I want you to mark it on your calendar that when we release Spiritual DNA 2.0, you want to be the first in line to take the course. If you're at a place right now where you go, Darren, I think I am stuck. I think I'm working at the Ketchup factory right now, and I know that God has more for me, but I don't know what my path is. I don't know where I would do it. I don't know what I do exceptionally. That you need to go through Spiritual DNA 2.0 when it launches, so you can answer those questions. You can know who you are. You can know why you do what you do. You can know what you do and how you do it better than the 33 other million people, and you can know where God has equipped you and given you a burden to serve. That's what Spiritual DNA helps you unpack. And when 2.0 drops, I can't wait for you to take the course and be a part of the community. All right, guys and girls. Always a joy to be with you. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out. You can text me, 317-550-5070. You can also email me, Darren@blackbirdmission.com, or leave any comment on any of the social medias or here on the podcast channel as well. We love you being a part of the community. It means the world that you download and listen or watch each week. And we'll talk to you next week right here on the Darren of the Wine podcast. Until that time, remember, God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far away, and he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. Thanks, guys.